The midday sun hammered down on the concrete parking lot of Atlanta PD's headquarters, heat waves shimmering off the hoods of patrol cars lined in perfect rows. Sarah Collins stepped out of her unmarked vehicle, squinting against the glare, and heard the radio chatter from inside the building bleeding through open windows, voices tight with urgency. Max leaped out behind her, his paws hitting the pavement with a soft thud, tongue lolling as he panted in the oppressive heat. She glanced down at him, noting the alertness in his amber eyes despite the temperature. Something was off. The usual rhythm of the precinct felt fractured, like a drum beat with a missing note. She pushed through the glass doors into the air-conditioned lobby, and the shift in temperature hit her skin like a slap. Officers clustered near the front desk, voices low, faces drawn. Sarah caught fragments as she moved past them. Missing, 3 days, no contact, Detective Marcus Hale. The name stopped her mid-stride. Max pressed against her leg, sensing the change in her posture. Marcus was solid, a 12-year veteran with a reputation for closing cases that made other detectives pull all-nighters. He didn't just vanish. Sarah took the stairs 2 at a time, Max at her heels, his claws clicking on the polished steps. The K-9 unit office was on the 3rd floor, but she veered left toward major crimes. The bullpen was packed, detectives huddled around desks covered in maps, printouts, and coffee cups. Lieutenant Derek Moss stood at the head of the room, arms crossed, his jaw set in that way that meant the situation was worse than anyone was saying out loud. "Collins," he called out when he saw her, "need you and Max on this." She wove through the desks, Max moving in perfect sync beside her. Moss gestured to a map of Atlanta pinned to the board behind him, red circles marking locations across the industrial district. Marcus Hale went dark 72 hours ago. Last known location was a warehouse operation on Marietta Street, controlled by suspected fentanyl distribution. He checked in at 2200 hours, confirmed the meet, then nothing. Phones off. Vehicle found abandoned 2 blocks from the site, doors unlocked, no signs of struggle. Sarah studied the map, her mind already running scenarios. Who was his backup? Officer Ramirez and Officer Chen. They were positioned on the perimeter, visual on the entrance. Marcus went in solo to make contact with the cellar. Standard protocol. He was supposed to signal if the deal went south, but they never got a call. When he didn't exit after 30 minutes, they breached. Place was empty. No Marcus, no suspects, no drugs, just empty crates and dust. Cameras? Wiped. Professionally. Someone knew what they were doing. Sarah felt the weight of it settle in her chest. Professionals didn't just grab a cop in the middle of an operation without leaving traces. Either Marcus walked into something far bigger than a controlled buy, or something inside the operation had been compromised from the start. She glanced down at Max, who sat attentive, watching her face. He could sense her tension, the way her breathing had shifted. "What do you need from us?" she asked. Moss handed her a sealed evidence bag. Inside was a gold shield, Atlanta PD Detective Badge number 4172, Marcus's badge. "Found this an hour ago in an alley off Huff Road, about 3 miles from the warehouse. Patrol spotted it during a sweep. We're treating it as a breadcrumb, maybe a signal from Marcus if he's still able to communicate, or a taunt if someone else has him." Sarah took the bag, holding it up to the light. The badge was scuffed, dirt smudged along the edges, but otherwise intact. No blood, no obvious damage. She looked at Moss. "You want Max to track from the location?" "That, and anything else he picks up. We've got teams canvassing, but you know how this goes. If there's something we're missing, Max will find it." She nodded, already planning the route in her head. The industrial district was a maze of abandoned buildings, rail yards, and crumbling infrastructure, perfect for someone trying to disappear or hide a body. She didn't say that last part out loud, but it hung in the room anyway, unspoken and heavy. I'll need the exact coordinates and any surveillance footage from the area, even if it's grainy. Already loaded into your tablet. Take Ramirez with you. He knows the layout. Sarah turned to leave, but Moss's voice stopped her. Collins, Marcus is one of ours. Bring him home. She met his eyes, saw the exhaustion and fear buried under the command. We will. The elevator ride down was silent except for the mechanical hum of cables and gears. Ramirez stood beside her, his reflection visible in the polished steel doors. He looked young in that light, younger than his 26 years, and Sarah wondered how many more operations like this it would take before that youth burned away completely. She had seen it happen to good cops, watched them age decades in a span of months when the job got too heavy. You worked with Marcus before? She asked, breaking the silence. Ramirez nodded. Twice. Once on a robbery case in Buckhead, another time on a homicide in East Atlanta. He was sharp, methodical, never rushed into anything without thinking it through first. That's why this doesn't make sense. Marcus wouldn't just walk into a trap. Unless he didn't know it was a trap. The doors opened, and they stepped out into the underground parking garage. The air was cooler here, thick with the smell of oil and exhaust. Sarah's vehicle was parked near the exit, and Max was already waiting by the door, his tail wagging slightly when he saw them approaching. Or unless someone he trusted set him up, Ramirez added quietly. Sarah stopped, her hand on the door handle, and looked at him. You think it was internal? I don't know what to think, but Marcus was working cases that stepped on a lot of toes. Organized crime, gang distribution, corrupt officials. He had enemies on both sides of the law. She opened the door, and Max jumped into the back seat, settling immediately into his spot. Sarah slid behind the wheel, and Ramirez took the passenger side. As she started the engine, she couldn't shake the feeling that this case was about to get a lot more complicated than a simple missing person investigation. The drive to Huff Road took 20 minutes, traffic thinning as they left downtown and entered the industrial sprawl. Warehouses stretched along both sides of the street, their windows dark and broken, walls covered in layers of graffiti that told stories of a neighborhood long abandoned by legitimate business. Homeless encampments dotted the sidewalks, tents and shopping carts clustered under overpasses. This was the kind of area where people disappeared and no one asked questions. Sarah pulled up to the alley where Marcus's badge had been found. Yellow police tape cordoned off the area, and 2 patrol officers stood guard, their faces pale in the afternoon sun. She parked and let Max out, watching as he immediately began sniffing the ground, his nose working in quick, methodical patterns. Ramirez grabbed the evidence bag with the badge and followed her to the tape. Who found it? Sarah asked one of the patrol officers, a young woman with sharp eyes and a nervous energy that suggested she hadn't been on the force long. I did, Lieutenant. Officer Hernandez. We were doing a grid search, checking dumpsters and storm drains like you ordered. It was just lying there, right next to that dumpster, like someone dropped it, or wanted us to find it. Sarah crouched down, examining the spot. The alley was narrow, flanked by the backs of 2 warehouses, both long abandoned based on the rust and graffiti. Broken glass glittered on the asphalt like scattered diamonds, and the smell of rotting garbage mixed with something chemical, maybe old paint or solvents. Max circled the area, his movements precise, then stopped near the dumpster and sat, his signal for detecting a scent. She approached him, running her hand along his back. What is it, boy? Max's nose twitched, and he moved closer to the dumpster, not barking but clearly agitated. His body language was different from his usual confident alert. There was hesitation there, something that made Sarah's instincts fire up. She pulled on a pair of gloves and lifted the dumpster's lid. The stench hit her immediately. Spoiled food, soaked cardboard, and underneath it all something metallic. She used a flashlight to scan the contents, pushing aside bags of trash, and then she saw it. A dark stain on a crumpled shirt, too deliberate to be accidental. Blood. Ramirez, call it in. We need forensics here now. He was already on his radio, voice steady despite the tension. Sarah photographed the shirt, careful not to disturb it, then turned her attention back to Max. He was still focused on the dumpster, but his body language had shifted. Instead of the excitement of a find, he seemed uneasy, almost reluctant. His ears were flat against his head, and his tail was low, tucked slightly. She took the evidence bag with Marcus's badge and held it near Max's nose, letting him get a full scent. Standard procedure, let the K-9 familiarize himself with the target's scent before beginning a track. But Max's reaction was anything but standard. He sniffed once, twice, then pulled back sharply and barked. Not his usual alert bark, but something sharper, more defensive. He backed up a step, ears flat, and barked again, his eyes fixed on the badge as if it were a threat. Sarah's stomach tightened. In 7 years of working with Max, she had never seen him react like this to a piece of evidence. K-9s were trained to alert on scents, drugs, explosives, human remains. But this was different. This was refusal. He didn't want to be near the badge. She knelt beside him, her voice low and calm. "Easy, Max. What's wrong?" He barked again, his eyes locked on the evidence bag, and then he did something that made Sarah's blood run cold. He turned and walked away, putting distance between himself and the badge, his tail low and stiff. Refusal behavior. Avoidance. In a trained K-9, that meant one thing. The scent carried something dangerous, something wrong on an instinctual level. Ramirez jogged over, his radio still in hand, and saw Max's reaction. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know," Sarah said, sealing the evidence bag again. "But Max has never done that before, not once. He's trained to approach and alert, not retreat." "You think there's something contaminated on the badge, like poison or a chemical weapon?" "Maybe. Or maybe he's picking up something we can't detect. Dogs can smell fear, stress hormones, even diseases. If Marcus was in a high-stress situation when he handled this badge, Max might be reacting to that." But even as she said it, Sarah knew it didn't quite fit. Max had worked dozens of cases involving stressed victims and suspects. He had tracked through crime scenes, soaked in adrenaline and fear. This was something else entirely. She stood slowly, her mind racing. If the badge was the key, then understanding Max's reaction was critical. She needed to get the badge analyzed, not just for fingerprints and DNA, but for chemical compounds, trace materials, anything that might explain why a trained K-9 would refuse to engage with it. "Let's run the scene again," she said. "Every inch. I want photos, measurements, anything that might tell us why the badge ended up here and why Max is reacting this way." They worked methodically, Ramirez documenting while Sarah followed Max's lead. The dog was calmer now, away from the badge, and he tracked along the alley walls, pausing occasionally to sniff at cracks in the pavement or spots where the asphalt had buckled. Halfway down the alley, he stopped at a storm drain and sat, his tail wagging slightly. A normal alert this time. Sarah crouched beside him, peering into the grate. It was too dark to see much, but she could hear water trickling below. She used her flashlight, angling it through the gaps, and caught a glint of something metallic lodged against the concrete edge. She radioed for a pry bar, and within minutes, Ramirez had the grate lifted. Sarah lowered herself carefully, her boots finding purchase on the slick concrete edges. The storm drain was shallow, maybe 4 feet deep, with a trickle of runoff flowing toward the main sewer line. And there, wedged against the side, was a cell phone. Sarah bagged it, noting the cracked screen and water damage, then climbed back up, her knees aching from the awkward position. "Marcus's?" Ramirez asked. "We'll find out. But if it is, someone went through a lot of trouble to make it look like an accident. Phones don't just fall into storm drains." By the time forensics arrived, Sarah had catalogued everything: the badge, the bloody shirt, the phone, and detailed notes on Max's unusual behavior. The forensics team, led by a veteran tech named Angela Torres, moved through the scene with practiced efficiency, swabbing surfaces, collecting samples, photographing every angle. "You think this is a dump site or a crime scene?" Torres asked Sarah as she worked. "Both, maybe. Or neither. Something about this feels staged." Torres glanced up, her expression thoughtful. "Staged how?" "Like someone wanted us to find the badge but didn't want to make it too easy. The alley, the location, the timing, it's all deliberate. But why leave evidence that can be traced back to Marcus, unless the point is to send a message?" "What kind of message?" Sarah didn't answer. She wasn't sure yet, but the pieces were starting to form a picture, and she didn't like what she was seeing. Back at headquarters, Sarah sat in the tech lab while a forensic analyst named Kim worked on the recovered phone. Max lay at her feet, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes were open, watchful. The badge sat in a separate evidence locker across the room, sealed and secure. But Sarah noticed Max's gaze, flicking toward it every few minutes, his ears twitching as if he could still sense it even from this distance. Kim plugged the phone into a diagnostic machine, her fingers flying over the keyboard. The screen in front of her filled with lines of code and data streams, a digital autopsy of the device's last moments before it went dark. "It's definitely damaged, but the SIM card is intact," Kim said, her eyes never leaving the screen. "Water got into the circuitry, but not enough to corrupt the core memory. Give me a few minutes to extract the data." Sarah leaned back in her chair, her mind replaying Max's reaction to the badge. She had worked with K-9s long enough to trust their instincts over her own logic. If Max refused the badge, there was a reason. She pulled out her tablet and started researching cases where trained dogs had exhibited avoidance behavior. Most results pointed to chemical exposure: acids, toxins, accelerants, substances that triggered a survival response coded into the animal's DNA. "Got something," Kim said, interrupting her thoughts. "The phone's unlocked. Last activity was 73 hours ago, right around the time Marcus went missing. He made 3 calls that night, 2 to the precinct, standard check-ins, and 1 to an unlisted number. Can you trace it?" "Already on it. It's a burner, registered to a prepaid account with no name attached, but it pinged off a tower indicator. I'll have the exact location in a few minutes. There's also text messages, deleted, but I can recover them." Sarah stood and moved closer, watching as Kim's software peeled back layers of deleted data like an archaeologist uncovering ancient ruins. Text bubbles appeared on the screen, fragments of conversations that Marcus had tried to erase. "This is interesting," Kim said, pointing to a message thread. "Look at the timestamps. Marcus was texting this burner number for weeks before he disappeared. Short messages, mostly coordinates and times. No names, no details. Classic pattern for arranging meets." Sarah read the messages, her pulse quickening. The last text from Marcus, sent at 21:47 on the night he disappeared, read, "At location. No show yet. Something feels wrong." The response, sent 3 minutes later, was even more chilling. "Get out. Now." But Marcus never got out. Or if he did, he didn't make it far. "Can you pull call records for that burner number? I want to know everyone who contacted it in the last month." Kim nodded, already typing. "This might take a while. The network provider will need a warrant, but I can start the process." Sarah thanked her and left the tech lab, Max trailing behind. She needed air, needed to clear her head and think through what she knew so far. The precinct felt suffocating, the weight of Marcus's disappearance pressing down on everyone who passed through the halls. Conversations stopped when she walked by, eyes following her with a mixture of hope and suspicion. Finding Marcus was supposed to restore order, but instead it felt like she was peeling back layers of something rotten. She took the stairs down to the parking lot and sat on the hood of her car, Max jumping up beside her. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the heat finally starting to break. She ran her hand through Max's fur, feeling the tension in his muscles. "You're trying to tell me something, aren't you?" she said quietly, more to herself than to the dog. He leaned into her touch, a low whine escaping his throat. She had learned to read him over the years, to understand the nuances of his body language. And right now, he was telling her that the badge was wrong. Not just suspicious, wrong in a way that went beyond training, beyond protocol. Her phone buzzed. A text from Kim. "Burner number traced to an address in Decatur, 1427 Industrial Parkway. Warehouse registered to a shell company called Apex Holdings LLC. No owners on record. Sending coordinates now. Also, chemical analysis request approved for the badge. Lab will have results by morning." Sarah slid off the hood, her pulse quickening. This was the break they needed. She loaded Max into the car and called Moss. Filling him in on the lead, he authorized a tactical team and told her to wait for backup before approaching the warehouse. Standard procedure for a potentially hostile location. "Backup ETA is 20 minutes, Moss said over the phone. "Do not engage until they arrive, Collins. That's an order." "Understood." She hung up and stared at the coordinates on her screen. 20 minutes felt like an eternity, when every instinct was screaming at her to move. But Moss was right. Going in alone was reckless, especially when they didn't know what they were walking into. She used the time to pull up property records for the warehouse. Apex Holdings LLC had purchased the building 3 years ago for cash, no mortgage, no loans. The listed address for the company was a P.O. box in Delaware, a common setup for shell corporations designed to hide ownership. Whoever owned this warehouse didn't want to be found. The tactical team arrived in 2 armored vehicles, 6 officers in full gear, faces obscured by helmets and visors. Sergeant Rick Bowman, a veteran with 20 years in SWAT, approached Sarah's car and knocked on the window. "Lieutenant Collins, Moss briefed me on the situation. You think Detective Hale is inside?" "I don't know, but this address is connected to the burner phone he was texting before he disappeared. If he's not inside, someone who knows where he is might be." Bowman nodded. "We'll do a standard breach. Announce flashbangs if necessary. Room by room clear. You and the K-9 stay behind the entry team until we confirm it's secure." Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to be first through the door, but she knew better. Tactical had protocols for a reason, and Max was too valuable to risk in a blind entry. The convoy moved through Decatur in silence, lights off, engines low. The warehouse on Industrial Parkway was a sprawling structure of corrugated metal and crumbling brick, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Sarah studied the building through binoculars from the passenger seat of Bowman's vehicle. No lights, no movement, no vehicles visible. It looked abandoned, but the fence was too new. The lock on the gate too shiny. Someone was maintaining this place. Bowman's team moved with military precision, cutting the lock on the gate and flowing through the opening like water. Sarah followed at a distance, Max on a short lead beside her, his body tense and alert. The main entrance was a rolling steel door, locked tight, but there was a side door slightly ajar. Bowman signaled 2 officers to flank it, then gave the command. "Atlanta Police, we have a warrant. Come out with your hands visible." Silence, no response, no movement. Bowman waited 10 seconds, then nodded to his breacher. The officer kicked the door open, and the team poured inside, flashlights cutting through the darkness, voices overlapping in controlled chaos. "Clear left! Clear right! Staircase! Northwest corner!" Sarah entered behind them, Max pulling slightly on the lead, his nose working overtime. The warehouse was cavernous, filled with rows of empty shelving units and scattered pallets. Dust hung in the air, visible in the beams of their flashlights, and the smell of oil and rust was overwhelming. They moved deeper into the space, the tactical team spreading out to cover every angle. "Lieutenant, we've got a door here," one of the officers called from the far end of the warehouse. Sarah jogged over, Max staying close. The door was partially hidden behind a stack of crates, reinforced steel with a commercial-grade lock. Bowman examined it, then looked at Sarah. "This wasn't in the blueprints. Looks like a recent addition." "Can you breach it?" "We can, but it'll take a few minutes. This lock is serious hardware." While the breacher worked, Sarah let Max sniff around the door. He sat immediately, his alert signal, and pawed at the base of the door. Something was inside that room. Something important. The lock finally gave way with a metallic clunk, and Bowman pushed the door open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into a basement. Sarah's stomach tightened. Basements in industrial buildings like this were rarely good news. "Lights on, weapons ready," Bowman ordered. "Collins, you're with me." They descended the stairs, the temperature dropping with each step. The basement was smaller than the warehouse above, divided into several rooms with concrete walls and flickering fluorescent lights that barely worked. Sarah could hear water dripping somewhere in the distance, a rhythmic sound that echoed off the walls. The first two rooms were empty, bare concrete, no furniture, no signs of recent use. But the third room was different. The door was reinforced steel with a keypad lock, the kind used for high-security storage. Bowman tried the handle, expecting resistance, but it swung open easily. Someone had left it unlocked, or wanted them to find what was inside. Sarah stepped inside, and her breath caught. The room was a makeshift office, a metal desk, a filing cabinet, a corkboard covered in photos and documents, and in the center of it all, a large map of Atlanta mounted on the wall, with red pins marking dozens of locations. Sarah recognized some of them immediately. Crime scenes she had worked, drug busts Marcus had led, evidence lockups, courthouse annexes, precinct locations. "What the hell is this?" Bowman muttered, stepping closer to the map. Sarah moved to the desk, rifling through papers with gloved hands. Bank statements, transfer records, lists of names. Some she recognized as informants Marcus had used, others as officers from various departments across the city. And then she found it, buried under a stack of files. A ledger, handwritten in Marcus's precise block letters, detailing transactions going back 2 years. Dates, amounts, cryptic initials that matched names she had seen in other documents. And at the top of every page, a single notation. MH, Operations Fund. Sarah's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. This wasn't a kidnapping. This wasn't a rescue mission. Marcus was dirty. He had been running a parallel operation, skimming from evidence lockups, selling confiscated drugs back onto the streets, using his position and reputation to build a network that stretched across Atlanta. And he had been doing it for years, right under everyone's noses. "Lieutenant," Bowman said quietly, standing beside her, "is this what I think it is?" She couldn't speak. The evidence was overwhelming, damning, and impossible to ignore. Every case Marcus had touched, every arrest he had made, every commendation he had received, all of it was now suspect. How many convictions would be overturned? How many criminals would walk free because a dirty cop had tainted the evidence? "We need to bag all of this," she finally said, her voice hollow. "Everything, every document, every photo, every piece of paper in this room. And we need to find Marcus before he disappears for good." Bowman radioed for an evidence team, and within minutes, forensic techs were flooding the basement, cameras flashing, gloved hands carefully collecting every scrap of information. Sarah stood in the corner, watching them work, feeling the weight of what she had uncovered pressing down on her chest like a physical force. Max sat beside her, pressed against her leg, as if he could sense her distress. She reached down and ran her hand over his head, grateful for the solid, uncomplicated loyalty he represented. In a world where cops could betray their oaths and colleagues could hide monstrous secrets, Max was constant, honest, true. Her phone rang. Moss. She answered, her voice steady despite everything. "We found something," she said. "You're going to want to see this." The drive back to headquarters was a blur. Sarah barely remembered navigating through traffic, her mind replaying every interaction she had ever had with Marcus. Had there been signs, moments when he seemed evasive or overly interested in case details that didn't concern him? She couldn't pinpoint anything specific, and that made it worse. Marcus had been good at his job, good at hiding, good at playing the role of the dedicated detective while building his empire in the shadows. Moss met her in the parking garage, his face grey with exhaustion and something else, anger, betrayal, grief. They rode the elevator to his office in silence, and once the door was closed, he turned to her with eyes that held too many questions. "Tell me everything." She did. Every detail, every document, every piece of evidence they had found in that basement office. Moss listened without interrupting, his jaw clenching tighter with each revelation. When she finished, he sank into his chair and stared at the wall, his hands folded in front of him. "How long have you suspected?" "I didn't. Not until Max reacted to the badge. That was the first indication something was fundamentally wrong. Everything else came from following that thread." The badge. What was wrong with it? "I don't know yet. Chemical analysis is being processed, but Max refused to engage with it, which is completely outside his training. He's never done that before. Whatever Marcus handled before he planted that badge, it triggered an avoidance response in Max." Moss nodded slowly, processing. "You think Marcus planted his own badge to throw us off his trail, make it look like he was kidnapped?" "That's exactly what I think. The badge was clean except for trace materials. No blood, no signs of struggle. It was placed deliberately in that alley, in a location we would eventually search. Marcus knew our protocols, knew how we would respond. He bought himself time to liquidate his assets and disappear. But he didn't count on Max. No, he didn't." Moss stood and walked to the window, staring out at the city lights beginning to flicker on as dusk settled over Atlanta. "This is going to destroy the department. Every case Marcus touched will be questioned. Defense attorneys will have a field day, convictions will be overturned, criminals will walk. I know, and the media. God, the media is going to crucify us." Sarah said nothing. There was nothing to say. The fallout from this would be catastrophic, a wound that would take years to heal, if it ever did. "We need to find him," Moss said, turning back to face her. "Before he gets on a plane or crosses a border. If he vanishes, we lose any chance of understanding the full scope of his operation." The burner phone records, Kim was pulling call logs. If we can identify who else was involved, we might be able to trace Marcus's next move. "Get back to the lab. I'll brief the chief and start the internal affairs process. This stays contained until we have Marcus in custody. I don't want leaks. I don't want speculation. We do this by the book." Sarah nodded and left the office, her legs heavy as she walked back to the tech lab. Max followed silently, his presence a comfort she desperately needed. Kim was still at her workstation, surrounded by empty coffee cups and printouts. She looked up when Sarah entered, her expression grim. "I've got the call logs. You're not going to like this." Sarah pulled up a chair and sat beside her, studying the screen. The burner phone had made over 200 calls in the past 6 months, most of them to numbers registered in Atlanta, but some to locations as far as Miami, Houston, and Los Angeles. Kim had cross-referenced the numbers with known criminal databases and found matches to suspected dealers, cartel associates, and corrupt officials. "This is a network," Sarah said quietly. Marcus wasn't working alone. He had connections across multiple cities, multiple organizations. "There's more. Look at this." Kim highlighted a cluster of calls made in the week before Marcus disappeared. These numbers all belong to officers in the Atlanta PD. 5 different detectives, 2 patrol officers, and 1 lieutenant. Sarah felt sick. Internal corruption. It gets worse. One of the detectives who received calls from Marcus is on the task force searching for him right now. The room seemed to tilt. Sarah gripped the edge of the desk, forcing herself to breathe. If Marcus had allies inside the department, then every move they made could be compromised. Information could be leaked, evidence could disappear, witnesses could be intimidated. "Who?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kim pulled up a file. Detective Brian Foster, 20 years on the force, assigned to narcotics. He's been working with Moss on coordinating the search. Sarah knew Foster. Solid reputation, quiet demeanor, the kind of cop who did his job without fanfare. And now he was potentially dirty, feeding information to Marcus, helping him stay ahead of the investigation. "We need to isolate him without tipping him off," Sarah said. "If he realizes we know, he'll warn Marcus or destroy evidence." "How do you isolate someone without them noticing?" "Carefully." Sarah called Moss and explained the situation. His response was immediate and decisive. Foster would be reassigned to administrative duties under the guise of needing his expertise for case file reviews. It would keep him out of the active investigation without raising alarms. Meanwhile, internal affairs would begin a quiet investigation into his finances and communications. "What about the other names on that list?" Moss asked. "I'm working through them now, but we need to move fast. If Marcus suspects we're onto his network, he'll burn it all down and disappear." "Agreed. Keep me updated." Sarah hung up and turned back to Kim. "I need everything you can pull on those officers. Bank records, phone logs, property ownership, travel history. Anything that might show a connection to Marcus or unexplained income." "That's going to take time." "We don't have time. Marcus could be boarding a plane right now." Kim sighed but nodded, her fingers already flying across the keyboard. Sarah stood and paced the small lab, her mind racing through possibilities. Marcus was smart, methodical. He wouldn't run without a plan, without securing his assets and covering his tracks. But he was also human, and humans made mistakes. All Sarah had to do was find that one mistake, that one loose thread that would unravel everything. Her phone buzzed. A text from the forensics lab. "Chemical analysis complete on badge. Results attached. Call me." Sarah opened the attachment, her heart pounding. The report was dense with technical jargon, but the summary was clear. The badge contained trace amounts of fentanyl powder, acetone, and several binding agents commonly used in drug processing. The concentrations were low, almost imperceptible to standard tests, but a K-9's nose was sensitive enough to detect parts per trillion. That was why Max had refused the badge. He had smelled the drugs, recognized the danger, and instinctively pulled away. It was a survival response, hardwired into his training and biology. But it also meant something else. Marcus had been handling processed fentanyl recently, likely in the same location where he had staged his disappearance, which meant the warehouse on Marietta Street, the site of the supposed controlled buy, was more than just a meeting place. It was a processing site, a distribution hub, or both. Sarah called Torres, the forensics lead, and explained her theory. "I need you to go back to that warehouse and do a complete workup. I'm looking for drug residue, processing equipment, anything that suggests it was being used for manufacturing or distribution." "We already cleared that scene, Lieutenant. It was clean." "Then someone cleaned it very well. But trace evidence is almost impossible to completely eliminate. Check the drains, the ventilation, under the floorboards if you have to. If Marcus was running drugs through that location, there will be something." Torres agreed, and Sarah felt a small measure of hope. Piece by piece, the puzzle was coming together. Marcus's operation was vast, but it wasn't invisible. Every transaction left a trail, every communication a record. And now that they knew what they were looking for, it was only a matter of time before the entire network collapsed. The next 72 hours were a blur of interrogations, evidence processing, and sleepless nights. Sarah barely left the precinct, surviving on coffee and adrenaline while teams of detectives and federal agents worked around the clock to dismantle Marcus's empire. The warehouse on Marietta Street yielded exactly what she had suspected: trace fentanyl in the drainage system, acetone residue in the ventilation, and tool marks on the floor, consistent with heavy equipment used for pill pressing. Marcus had been using the warehouse as a processing site, bringing in raw materials and producing counterfeit pills that flooded the streets. The controlled buy had never been about making an arrest. It had been Marcus's cover for one final production run before he disappeared with the profits. The break in the case came when one of the names in Marcus's ledger, a mid-level dealer named Carlos Vega, was picked up during a raid on the south side. Faced with federal drug trafficking charges that carried a mandatory minimum of 20 years, Vega flipped immediately, providing details of Marcus's operation in exchange for a reduced sentence. Sarah sat across from Vega in an interrogation room, Max lying quietly in the corner, watching. Vega was small, wiry, with tattoos crawling up his neck and fear in his eyes. He knew what happened to people who cooperated with the police. But he also knew what happened to people who went to federal prison. "Marcus Hale," Sarah said, sliding a photo across the table. "Tell me about him." Vega stared at the photo, his jaw working. "Man, I don't know if I should be talking about this." "You're already talking, Carlos. The question is whether you want to spend the next 20 years in a cell or get out in 5. Your cooperation determines which one happens." He exhaled slowly, then nodded. "Yeah, I know Marcus. Everybody knows Marcus. He's the plug, the guy who makes things happen. You need product, you go through him. He's connected to everyone, cartels, local distributors, even some of the guys in blue." "How long have you been working with him?" "About a year, maybe more. He came to me through a mutual friend. Said he had access to high-quality fentanyl at wholesale prices, better than what the cartels were offering, and safer because he was a cop. Nobody was going to question him." "Where did he get the drugs?" "Evidence lockup, mostly. Stuff that was supposed to be destroyed. He'd take a little here, a little there, replace it with fake product or filler. By the time anyone noticed, the case was closed and the evidence was already incinerated. Smart, you know." Sarah felt her stomach turn. "How much are we talking about? Pounds, kilos?" "Over the last year, I'd say Marcus moved at least 50 kilos through my network alone, and I'm just one guy. He had dealers in every district, every neighborhood. Dude was making bank. Where is he now?" Vega hesitated and Sarah leaned forward. "Carlos, this is the question that determines your future. Where is Marcus Hale?" "Last I heard, he was holed up in a rental property in Marietta. Off the books, paid in cash. He's waiting for his final payout. Then he's gone. Probably Mexico or Central America, somewhere without extradition." "Address?" "I don't have an exact address, but it's near the old Lockheed plant. My boy delivered there once, said it was a small house, blue shutters, chain-link fence. That's all I know, I swear." Sarah stood, her mind already mapping the area. Marietta was a sprawling suburb north of Atlanta, and the old Lockheed plant covered hundreds of acres. But it was a starting point, more than they had before. "Thank you, Carlos. You just bought yourself a future." She left the interrogation room and immediately called Moss, relaying the information. Within an hour, a team was assembled: tactical, K-9, surveillance, and federal agents from the DEA. They would canvass the area near the Lockheed plant, identify properties matching Vega's description, and move in fast before Marcus had a chance to run. The drive to Marietta took 30 minutes, the convoy moving in silence through suburban streets lined with modest homes and old industrial buildings. Sarah sat in the lead vehicle, Max beside her, and felt the familiar pre-operation adrenaline coursing through her veins. This was it, the endgame. Either they found Marcus or he disappeared forever, and the case would remain open. Haunting the department for years, the surveillance team identified 3 properties matching Vega's description, all within a 2-mile radius of the old Lockheed plant. Moss made the call to hit all 3 simultaneously, spreading the resources thin, but ensuring Marcus couldn't slip away while they checked each location individually. Sarah's team drew the middle property, a small, single-story house with blue shutters, a chain-link fence, and an overgrown yard. It looked abandoned, but there was a car in the driveway, a nondescript sedan with Georgia plates. Sarah ran the plates through the database and got a hit. Registered to a shell company, same as the warehouse in Decatur. "This is it," she said into her radio. "All units, we have positive ID on the target location. Prepare to breach on my mark." The tactical team moved into position, surrounding the house, blocking exits, covering windows. Sarah and Max approached the front door, and she could feel the tension radiating off her partner. He knew something was about to happen, could sense the controlled violence simmering just beneath the surface. Bowman gave her a nod, and she raised her voice. "Marcus Hale, Atlanta Police, we have a warrant. Come out with your hands visible." Silence, no response, no movement. Sarah counted to 10, then nodded to Bowman. The breacher stepped forward, planted the ram, and smashed through the door in one powerful swing. The team poured inside, flashlights and weapons sweeping the small interior. Kitchen clear, living room clear, bathroom clear, bedroom. Sarah pushed the door open and found Marcus sitting on the edge of the bed, a suitcase packed beside him, a plane ticket to Mexico on the nightstand. He didn't run, he didn't resist. He just looked at Sarah, and for a moment she saw something like regret in his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by cold resignation. "You should have let it go, Collins," he said as Bowman cuffed him. "You had no idea what you were stepping into." "I knew enough," she replied, her voice steady. "Max knew more." Marcus laughed, bitter and hollow. "A dog. I got taken down by a dog." "No," Sarah said, stepping closer. "You got taken down because you forgot what it means to be a cop. Max just reminded me what that looks like." They led him out to the waiting vehicles, past neighbors who had come out to watch, past the media vans that had somehow already arrived. Sarah ignored the cameras, ignored the shouted questions, and focused on getting Marcus into custody without incident. Back at headquarters, Marcus was processed and transferred to a federal holding facility. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Ledgers, bank records, witness testimony, forensic analysis. He would spend the rest of his life in prison, and the network he had built would be dismantled piece by piece. But the damage was done. Internal Affairs launched a full investigation into every case Marcus had touched, every officer he had worked with. 3 other cops were arrested, their careers ended, their reputations destroyed. Dozens of convictions were overturned, and criminals walked free because the evidence against them had been tainted by a corrupt detective. The media ran the story for weeks, dissecting every detail, turning Marcus into a symbol of institutional failure. The Atlanta PD became a punchline, a cautionary tale about what happens when oversight fails and corruption takes root. Sarah gave her statement to IA, answered every question with brutal honesty, and handed over every piece of evidence she had collected. But the hardest part wasn't the interrogations or the press conferences. It was walking through the precinct and seeing the looks on her colleagues' faces, some grateful, some resentful, all of them haunted by the realization that one of their own had betrayed everything they stood for. Moss called her into his office a week after Marcus's arrest. She sat across from him, Max at her feet, and waited. "You did good work, Collins," Moss said, though his voice was heavy with exhaustion. "But I'm not going to lie to you. This has shaken the department to its core. People are questioning everything, everyone. Trust is gone. It's going to take years to rebuild. I know. Some of the guys think you went too far, that you should have handled it quietly, kept it in-house, protected the department's reputation." Sarah met his eyes, her voice firm. "If I'd done that, Marcus would be in Mexico right now, and we'd still be chasing ghosts. And more importantly, he'd still be out there selling poison to kids. I don't regret what I did." Moss nodded slowly. "Neither do I, but you need to be prepared for the blowback. Not everyone's going to see it that way. You expose corruption, but you also expose the department's failures. Some people won't forgive that." She stood, signaling the end of the conversation. "I can live with that." A month later, Sarah stood in the K-9 training yard, watching Max run through an obstacle course with the kind of pure, uncomplicated joy that only came from doing what he was born to do. The sun was high, the air warm, and for the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe without the weight of the case crushing her chest. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. She opened it, frowning, and read, "Thank you for not letting it slide. Some of us still believe in what the badge is supposed to mean. Keep fighting. A friend in the department." She didn't know who sent it, and she didn't need to. It was enough to know that somewhere in the precinct, in the city, there were people who still cared about doing the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it cost them. Max trotted over, panting and happy, his tail wagging furiously. Sarah crouched down and wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face into his fur. "You knew all along, didn't you?" she whispered. "You knew something was wrong with that badge, and you tried to tell me." He licked her face, and she laughed, the sound surprising even herself. They had been through hell together, but they had come out the other side, and as long as she had Max by her side, she knew they could face whatever came next. Because at the end of the day, the badge wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a promise to protect, to serve, to uphold justice even when the system failed. And some promises were worth fighting for, no matter the cost, no matter how many people turned their backs, no matter how isolated the fight became. Sarah stood, brushing the dust off her pants, and looked out across the training yard. The world was complicated, filled with grey areas and difficult choices. But in Max, she saw something simple and true. Loyalty, courage, integrity. The qualities that should define every cop, every badge, every person who swore an oath to protect others. And in that moment, standing in the warm Atlanta sun with her partner beside her, Sarah made her own promise. She would never stop fighting, never stop questioning, never stop trusting her instincts, and the instincts of the dog who had seen through Marcus's lies when no one else could. The badge might have been tarnished, but it could be polished again. The department might have been broken, but it could be rebuilt. And justice, however delayed, however difficult, would always be worth pursuing. Max barked once, sharp and clear, as if agreeing with her thoughts. Sarah smiled and scratched behind his ears. "Come on, partner. Let's go home."